So, hi everyone, I am Priyanka. If you've been wanting to one of these presentations before, just know that this is mainly meant for informational purposes because really the whole process, the entire college applications process is a little scary when you don't have enough information, and there are two huge aspects that are at stake, which would, for parents, this is your child and it's your money. So when basically I started about 10 years ago in this industry, and when I realized that parents are just not getting enough information, I started partnering with libraries to kind of just do these free information sessions purely just to help you out. There's no advertising, nothing like that. This is about as much information as you're going to get about me. And at the end, I'll even show you an example of what a newsletter is if you are interested in signing up. But again, that is completely optional. So once again, welcome to this session. Whoops, I think there we go. All right, so today we are going to talk just probably the reason most of you are here, which is the breakdown between the SAT and the ACT. So what are the differences? Which one should you take? How do you determine which one to take? That sort of thing. Then we talk about the scoring of these tests. So part of winning basically the strategy to winning this whole test is essentially understanding the scoring system. Then there are a couple of upcoming changes, which they were supposed to go into effect this September with the ACT, but then ACT postponed it due to COVID. And to be honest, I don't know what else is going on behind the scenes because they simply said it was due to COVID, but it's a little hazy. And then after that, reporting scores. This is really relevant to the current seniors because they're the ones who have to directly report scores. And approximately, we're thinking this will take about an hour, 15 minutes, and then we'll always have Q&A. There are slides in here that are just transition slides. If you have questions along the way, please feel free to post in the chat at any given point. I will keep track of the chat. So you won't have to wait until the very end and save your questions to just ask as we go along. All right, so one of the major questions that we have is like, what do we need to do for university? What are the components of the college application? And the first part is coursework. Now there's an asterisk there because the coursework is the most important part of your application. This shows your performance as a student in a 3-year basis, right? So they're looking for some sort of consistency, or if you started off rough in the beginning, they're looking for some level of improvement. Also, you want a varied course load. So you don't just want all the easy classes, but at the same time, you also just don't want to kill yourself with taking all the AP classes. Now, I know with Barlow, and I believe most people probably are Barlow in this group, but at least with Barlow, you can't actually take AP classes until 11th grade. Whereas if you're, at some other high school, you have chances to take them in 10th grade. Most high schools don't allow students to take them in 9th grade just because it's too scary of a workload. But either way, so universities want to see a varied workload. Even if you're not taking AP classes, did you go from regular to honors? Did you try? Did you balance and shuffle up your load, basically? Then after that, so we have your SAT and ACT testing, and that includes subject tests, which right now are not relevant. And after that, we have your personal component. So personal components include your extracurricular activities, and extracurricular activities are anything. They're jobs, they're also hobbies, basically anything you tend to spend a lot of your time doing. There's also a category within that. They will also let you include helping out family, but that's, if there's someone who just couldn't do an extracurricular activity outside of the house because there was, let's say, a grandmother or someone who moved in and needed, you have to help the family, like take care of this person, or someone was ill, that kind of thing. But that actually counts as one of your activities simply because that's where your time went. Honors and achievements, if you're in the National Honor Society, if you have a great score on your junior writing portfolio, if you're for Barlow students, and so on. And then college essay, AKA personal statement, it's the same thing. They just call it's 2 names for the same thing. But what most people don't realize is on top of your college essay, you also have something called supplemental essays. And these are mini essays that are associated with basically a university. So the college essay will go to every university. That'll be the one general thing. Then the supplemental essay will be questions that universities ask on their own. So I should say they're specific to the individual university. So let's say NYU could be like, why us? Why NYU? Or why Boston College? Or if you could be an object, what object would you be in why? Or if you could teach a class, what would it be and why? And so on. So some questions are direct and some, which means they want to see the research that you've done and you're not using generic details such as, oh, I love New York City, that's why I want to apply to NYU, or I love the campus. Don't say that. There's a separate session on that that's going to happen with writing with the library. So I'm sure that presenter will cover all of that. But then with so those are supplemental essays. And bottom line, keep track of how many supplemental essays, particularly for current juniors. Your summer is going to be spent writing, so just keep track of that. Other stuff, it's the recommendations, which interviews, if the university has interviews that offer, and demonstrated interest. Demonstrated interest does not mean that you just have to always go see the university, because universities understand that not every family can afford to either take the time or have the finances to actually travel everywhere to go see the university. So a good rule of thumb is basically if it's within driving distance, so like 3 to 4, 2 to 3 hours maybe, it's always a good idea to go see the university, then it can count for you. There are other ways of demonstrated interest, and we'll cover a little bit of that in our college application timeline session next month. But right now I want to stick just to the SAT, ACT, because there's just a lot of information coming. So that's kind of our focus for today. All right. Any questions so far? Just in the chat, or if you want to, actually preferably in the chat, that way we don't have overlap of speaking. Okay, so no questions so far. And again, I'll keep an eye on the chat. Now, just the major differences between the two exams. So let's ignore that part. For now, all we really need to know is that they're both about 3 hours. So no one's taking one exam or the other because one is significantly shorter. You're basically sitting there around the same time. So the perfect score for the SAT is a 1600. 400 is basically the equivalent of a 0, AKA writing your own name. And then ACT is a 1, which is 0, and then 36 is the perfect score. Going down even further for the breakdown. So the SAT has 5 reading passages. And in those 5 reading passages, you're going to have, the first passage is going to be literary. So some sort of writing piece that may be easy to read, or it might be in Old English and a struggle to read. We have no control over that. So first one's always a literary piece. Then you have 2 science passages and 2 social studies passages, which really just means, oh, they picked a research study that they want to talk about, or they picked this economic issue and they threw in a couple visuals. You have 52 questions based on that, and that's in 65 minutes. Note for the SAT, the consistent practice throughout is that you will have more time than you will have questions. ACT is a time crunch exam. So in this, you have 4 passages, and notice that for 40 questions, you have 35 minutes. Again, that's also going to be the consistent factor. Grammar, or the English section, there's rarely a student that does not finish the grammar section. It's simply editing. You're given the passage, there are underlined portions throughout the passage. You just have to correct those mistakes. So in that case, timing doesn't matter. Number of questions doesn't matter. Most students tend to finish that regardless of which test they take. The downside of grammar, or I should say, one reason why students don't do well on grammar is simply because they're just not taught grammar into the detail that they were even 7 years ago or 10 years ago. So now with Grammarly, with Google Docs, with Word document, all just auto-correcting everything, there's no reason to really learn grammar for these students. So when they see it on paper and they have to connect the dots, it doesn't play out nicely. However, that's only about 14 rules that you have to learn. They're basic subject versus verb, like subject verb matching, noun pronoun matching, and a couple others. So it's not excruciating for the parents. This is not something that sounds excruciating. For the teenagers, they're going to learn some things that they never knew existed because they had it auto-corrected. Math. So with the math, now math here is split into 2 sections, and this is just 1 section. Now for the math, this is probably where the biggest distinction between the 2 comes in. Arithmetic, Algebra 1, Algebra 2, Geometry. Trig over in SAT land is just the basic SOHCAHTOA that students learned usually at the end of Geometry or Algebra 2, depending on which class you took. But it's nothing crazy. It's not the trigonometry you learn in pre-calculus. You don't have to know much in detail. It's really, really surface level, basic SOHCAHTOA. Data analysis is just, can you read the chart, answer the questions? There's mean, median, mode involved, and so on, but that's consistent throughout. Now for the ACT, Trigonometry means you'd better know what the sine curve looks like, the cosine curve, the law of sines, law of cosines. You should know legitimate precalculus, so matrices, vectors, and so on. So if that is not your, if math just doesn't happen to be your strength, then you're better off taking the SAT instead of the ACT, simply because even within these topics, you really probably only need to know about 14 total. So you don't have to know all of geometry that you learned in 9th grade. You don't have to know all the algebra 1 or algebra 2. You just need to know maybe 5 from here and 4 from here and so on. So even when you prep for the SAT or the ACE, well, more so for the SAT, it's not everything you've ever learned. It's just those specific topics. ACT, on the other hand, tends to have a larger depth to it with its questions. So there are some obviously easier questions, but then it does get a little more detailed. Or a little more detailed as in you have to know multiple concepts surface level. All right, science. So there's no official science section in the ACT or SAT, but there are science and social studies questions just weaved in throughout, which just means they, you know, like I said, for the reading that there are 2 science passages and 2 social studies passages, that kind of thing. So they weave it in, but there's no official science section. ACT does have a science section. However, it's really just an extended reading section, and that's important to know. There's no science background required whatsoever. It's simply the left side of the page are the charts, the visuals, the experiment descriptions, and then on the right side of the page, you have about 5 to 7 questions based on those visuals or on the experiment description. Now, this one students don't do as well on simply because of the timing. That's all it is. When you have all of these visuals to jump back and forth, that tends to eat into your time, and you don't have time. So that that usually brings us, at least the first time around, and without practice, that tends to bring the overall score down. Okay, so going even further. Now the SAT has, like I said, it has 2 sections for math. One is no calc and one is calculator. It's not as intimidating as no calc sounds. It's not so bad. But the factor, they do use the test makers do use the intimidation factor as sort of a deterrent because, so we're going to get into this a little more when we talk about the scoring, but bottom line is that an average score is about 50% correct. So that means the test makers have to design a test where students who have basically learned all of these topics in school already still miss the questions that they have knowledge on. And to do that, they have to play on your emotions, namely fears, anxieties, and so on. Having a no calculator section is sort of scary and anxiety inducing. So no matter how easy the questions may be at times, there's already that embedded fear within the student that, oh shit, I don't have my calculator, my sense of security is gone. But that is something we can practice for. It's not difficult math, it's just getting comfortable with the fact that you are capable of it without a calculator. On an ACT, calculator is permitted at all times. Okay, so right now there's no essay registration available because of COVID. They actually turned off the essay feature from the College Board. So what's going on here is if you did have an essay to write for the SAT, the essay would basically be a two-page reading assignment, and on that it would be a persuasive piece. So it could be a president trying to convince us that we should go into space and it's a good idea to do so and dedicate money to do so. It might be a president trying to convince us that national parks are important, or it might be about civil rights, whatever it might be. Your job is not to say you agree or disagree. Your job is simply to say, oh, look, here's how they tried to convince us. They used emotional appeal. They used we instead of you guys to say, hey, it's all inclusive. They used logical appeal. They used juxtaposition or paradox or whatever it might be. So these are the rhetorical or literary devices that you've learned in your English class that come into play here. Here you are given an issue and you're given multiple perspectives from credible individuals in that field. And then based on that, you then have to develop your own reasoning. And basically this one, you're deconstructing a persuasive piece. This one, you're writing your persuasive piece. Okay, I'm going to skip over that because we do that more on the next slide. Okay, so in this case, scoring. Now this is from the College Board. So I should have clarified this earlier, but I think I just got excited into starting the presentation. But SAT is controlled by College Board. It's a non-educational nonprofit. This one, ACT, is also, it's by ACT, which is also an educational nonprofit. They were meant to be competitors. However, they decided to work together. So now you will see that on the coast, so on the East Coast and West Coast, the marketing for SAT is much higher. And in basically central, like just in the middle of our country, ACT marketing is a little bit higher. Now, I simply bring that up because ultimately even though we hear more about the SAT in Connecticut and just the East Coast, we can still take the ACT. So it's not one or the other. You can take both exams. Not recommended, but they are both available. Now, with that said, so scoring for these, we've covered it before, that was the range. Now, according to College Board, the annual report, average range is about a 1060, 1070. That's really, if we're trying to get very narrow, that's roughly where we land. Then ACT is about a 21. And these really don't change. Even from the year before, the numbers roughly stay the same. Above average. So now the question always ends up being, okay, well, great, but what's a good score? So one, before you even look at these numbers, it just depends on the university that you're trying to go to. Because there are universities where this is the perfect number, like that is the perfect range to be in, or 1200 is a perfect range. However, if you're thinking NYU or that tier of universities, then a 1350 and above. If you're thinking Harvard, Princeton, Yale, then that's going to be a 1450 and above. For ACT, a good, let's say NYU tier, then again, a 27 and above. If you're thinking Harvard, Princeton, Yale, then 32 and above. All right, so any questions so far? Okay. All right, so now a little bit about the scoring. Now, these tests are scored on a bell curve. And what that means is that in the 4 sections that each of these tests have, you could have gotten the same number of questions correct every single, throughout, let's say, in 3 different exams. So you took the test 3 times, and every single time you have the same numbers correct in every single section. But you're still going to have different final numbers. So even if you had, let's say, out of the 52 questions in the reading section, you got a 30 every single time, your final score, that 3-digit number out of 800, you could end up with a 500 in one exam, a 520 in another, a 540 in another, right? And that's because these tests are graded on a bell curve. So with the bell curve, I'm gonna mark on the screen. So with the bell curve, what happens is, let's use blue because that's not on the screen. So we're gonna use the SAT as an example. Now with the SAT, one section, so let's just say math, is perfect score is an 800. And an average score down the middle is going to be about a 500, which, so that's a 500. And then this is, of course, going to be the 200, equivalent of a 0. If nationally, so after you've taken the SAT and they start scoring, they see that most students are, instead of falling right, roughly in that range, are a little bit too far down here. So they're scoring too high. College Board will curve everyone's reading section or math section down to get you in the range that they want you to be in. If, on the other hand, students are going all too low, then College Board will bump everyone up by 10 points, 20 points, 30 points. Maximum I've seen is about 40 points, but really no more than that. So basically, that's why you end up with different numbers for even if you've gotten the same number of questions correct, because it depends on the difficulty level of the test itself. Why is this done? What is the purpose of this? Well, it's basically to keep the difficulty level consistent in the multiple times the test is given. So the SAT, for example, is given in August, in October, November, December, right? Well, there are always these rumors that get started of just, but the December test is easier than the March test, or the March test is easier than the May test. And there is no such thing because of this system. And this is actually called equating. And there was a scandal about it about 3 years ago when I think the public first realized that this existed. The test, like anyone who works in the test prep industry has known about it, but I think this was the first time that everyone else understood what equating was. But bottom line, this is done to keep the difficulty level of each test consistent, the scoring system consistent. There is no such thing as an easy SAT take or easy ACT take. Both companies curve. They test questions on students to make sure that they first fall into the range that we need them, that they need to be in. And if that falls short, then at the end they curve. So if a test is considered easy, then that's simply because if you took it at the end of the year, you've just learned more in school at that point, and you finished, the math level that you're in, so you just happen to have more knowledge, but it has nothing to do with the test makers themselves. All right, so with that said, I think oh shoot. Okay. Oh, okay, let's my computer's acting funky. There we go. All right, so then going from there. Now, what are you going to see on your score report? This is for the SAT. On the score report, which is now completely online, they used to mail these out, but now it's just available on your College Board account, which every student right now has a College Board account because you've taken the PSAT. So at least if you've been at Barlow, if you were at private school and you haven't taken a PSAT in 9th grade or 10th grade, then you may not have a College Board account. So that's just something to be aware of. Make sure you look for your password. All right, so total score, that's going to be the number out of 1600. Then it breaks down to section score, which is the reading/grammar combined and the math section. Each of those are out of 800. Now note the essay score is completely independent. So it does not in any way factor into your reading score at all. Then they go even further and break it down to basically they split up the reading and the grammar, and math stays an independent entity. Then there's something called cross-test scores. This is the science score and history score. Really, it's because remember how they weaved in the questions, science-based and the history-based? They're just now picking those out and saying, okay, cool, we're just going to combine them and give you a number for them. So that's where that comes in. And then, of course, you have sub-scores, which are just basically these are official labels from College Board. So if they don't mean much to you, yeah, they don't really mean much to me either. Because when you look at Heart of Algebra as a tutor, I have no way of knowing if a low Heart of Algebra score means you're bad at, or we need to work on your Algebra 1 or your Algebra 2. So I actually need to see the questions, or I just need you to tell me, basically. And we review for content, but still, like, some of the labels are just too broad. Universities don't care about any of this outside of the first two numbers. They don't care about any of this. They only care about the section scores and your total. That's a fun, important thing to know. All right, now this is important to understand. This is a rubric, because like I said, bell curve means that this can be tweaked by a question or 2 or 3 by test. So in this particular test, and this is the rubric. Now the blues represent raw scores, AKA the number of questions you've gotten correct. So let's say in the math section, we're just going to use math as the example because it's cleaner. So out of the 58 math questions, if a student got 34 correct, then you're probably going to get about a 560. Like I said, it could be a 550, it could be a 570, but roughly about a 560. Now, if you're trying to improve, notice how many more questions you need to get correct. So if you're trying to go up by 20 points, you need to get 2 more questions correct. If you're trying to go up to 600, right? You got a 560, you want a nice 600. You need 4 more questions correct. When you are working to improve your score, work up incrementally. A math score, about every question is worth about 10 points. Give or take, based again on the curve, but roughly 10 points. For the reading and the grammar, it's about 6 points. So now when you need to count up the number of questions correct, or the ones that you're confident on, this student would only need to get 36 correct. Look at how many you can still miss. Right? And that means, because again, it's a timed test, you don't have to complete the whole test. You just need to, of course, that doesn't mean you leave anything blank. You can guess, but now you can count up while you're still testing how many questions you're confident on. That goes for the reading and the grammar. We're just using math as an example, but that goes for the reading and the grammar. So you don't need a perfect score. You don't need to get to that 58. You can miss about 20 questions and still be at the higher end of average. Once you cross the 600, you're now in the above average range. And that means you still miss 18 questions, that's about a 40, right? So you can miss still 18 questions. So understand that when you work up incrementally, you have to actually have a number in mind that you need of the number of questions you need correct. And again, The next section, you add another 1 or 2 questions that you want correct. And then you add another 1 or 2. If you get to, again, if you successfully get to that number, then you add another 1 or 2. So that's how you work your way up. It's not magic, it's math. And that's important to remember because these tests are not intelligence exams. And as much as we all want to say, you know, oh my God, and I've had students do it, oh my God, but they're so smart. They got a 14 or 15, 20 just the first time without studying or whatever it is. Whereas I only got 1,000 or whatever. It's not an intelligence exam. These exams are not intelligence exams. As you just saw with the bell curve, as you just saw with the content that we're covering, these tests are purposely designed to get you into a certain score range, even though they include material you already know. When you think about what's on the test, a reading section, read the passage, answer the questions. Well, we've been doing that ever since we first started school. When we first learned how to read, we've done the complete the sentence and then here's a passage, answer, what's it about? What's the purpose? What's the main idea? And so on. So how is it that most students are still getting roughly half the test wrong? Because a 500 is about a 26 out of 58. So you're really getting about half the test right. And it's because it's purposely designed with the tricky wording, with leaving or making questions seem purposely intimidating, and so on. So it's an emotional game as much as it's just a content game. And to just emphasize that, to make one SAT exam costs about $250,000. So that should give you an idea of just how much they're investing in the people and the test and everything to ensure that students are in that, they fall into this predetermined range of number correct. So it's a puzzle, right? It's like a Rubik's Cube, I usually say Rubik's Cube because how long did it take you to solve that puzzle? Well, that depends. How much time and effort did you put into the practice? If you didn't, it's going to take you a while. If you did, it's going to go faster and better, more accurate, and so on. So it's important to separate your intelligence, your understanding of intelligence from this test. Otherwise, it leads to a lot of stress, particularly in students, because then it leads to the low self-esteem, frustration, and so on. Ultimately, think of it as a game, and you just have to master the game. So ACT, without getting into as much detail, it's the same thing. In this case, because the ACT has 4 different sections, they're actually all graded on a scale of 36. So each one of these is basically on a scale of 1 to 36, and then the score is just averaged. Now, there are no such things as decimal scores. So really, you would go to the next whole number, which is 28. So this student would have gotten a 28 on this SAT, on this ACT. But it's the same idea with the curving, same idea with understanding the number of questions you need correct to get to a certain overall score and so on. Same idea. So understand the scoring rubrics, again, roughly, because they tweak a little. And when I say a little, up by a question or 2, maximum by 3. So nothing dramatic like 10 question jump. So just 2 or 3. So always have an idea of how many questions you need to get correct. And that gives you an idea of where to allocate your time and where you can skip everything. All right, so a couple key points. If you understand the scoring system, you can beat the test. At least you can get above an average. And that's just with the knowledge that you have. So without overdoing it and burning yourself out, that's doable just by understanding it and thinking through your strategy. 2, so every single, whether it's the SAT or ACT, because of that bell curve and because they're trying to get you into that certain score range, every exam is going to have a section 5. This is called the experimental section. However, they don't tell you it's the experimental section. So I've had students go in and take the section 5 and then proctors actually tell them it's graded. Now, it's actually not graded at all. This is simply the test company testing out questions on you to see that the difficulty level of these questions fall into the category that they think it does. If it does, great. They're simply going to change up the names and numbers, but leave the concept and put it in the real test. If it's too easy, then they'll make them a little more difficult and then put them on the real test. Or if it's too hard, then they'll make them a little easier and then put them on the real test. So bottom line, if you are planning to retest, then it's always a good idea to do the experimental section. Don't just put your head down. Don't be done with the test because this will be the last section you do. So there are students who just want to doodle or put their heads down, just get it, be done. Don't do that. This is a good preview of what your test makers are thinking, of what your future questions could look like. Do them. See if there's a concept that you actually might need to review. There's something that threw you off. How? Why? What was it? And so on. So do the experimental section, even though it's not scored. Then, okay, so anyone with extended time. Now, first of all, it's very important that you get your 504 plan talk to your guidance counselor about it. It's difficult as a parent to do this directly, or as a teenager to do this directly in conjunction with College Board, because that will take months. I mean, the wait time is significantly different for counselors than it is for parents, and counselors get a quicker response. Everything goes through quickly, faster, much faster. And for parents, you could spend 6 months trying to get this one form through. So talk to the guidance counselors now. It's always good to have your 504 plan in place if it isn't already. For guidance counselors, I mean, this process could take 2 months, it could take 3 months, which is still better than the 6 months it could take you. So please take care of that if it's needed. Then for the most part, for both exams, SAT and ACT, extended time means time and a half. Now, if there is a special circumstance, then at that point you talk to the counselor and they directly contact College Board or ACT on your behalf to see what accommodations can be made. But in general, it tends to be time and a half. Special accommodations can be, from what I've seen, I've had students who've done 2 sections one day and then the remaining 2 sections another day, and both still had the extended time, but they just did 2 and 2. I've had friends of students who've done like 1 section per day. And some of them had their timing waived, which to be honest, I don't even know what kind of medical condition it took to have your timing completely waived, because it's just rare. It's completely rare. So that's what you're looking at when it comes to extended time. Actually, even for extended time, depending on who you are and how you are with testing for the reading, particularly the reading and the math, sometimes it might not even play in your favor, because if you tend to finish, roughly on time, and it's meaning you only go about 5 minutes over or 10 minutes over, then it's easier to teach you to work within the time limit than to give you this whole extra like 20 minutes that you might not even need. Because in those 20 minutes, I've had students who just start second guessing themselves, and they end up changing the correct answer and moving to the wrong answer. So it actually ends up being a bit of a detriment. So that's also something to consider when you have time and a half, is how necessary and needed is it, or how beneficial will it be as a strategy for this particular test? All right, any questions so far? This is going much faster than I expected, so good news. And I will show you a couple of resources online, so we're not going to just leave you with just this presentation. Okay, so ACT. Couple of things it planned to do. First, it planned to do them last September, and then it planned to do them this September, and now it's planning to do them next year. But it's TBD in terms of, they never actually said next September. They just said, we're going to wait. Well, they were planning to go, they were going to have paper-based testing, which is normal. That's what we all have. But they were also going to offer online testing. Online testing is still at a test site. It's just online. That's all. So you'd still be going to a test site. You're not just doing this in your dining room table or something. Then the other option was going to be, you take the full length test one time, but then you can walk in and do a particular section that you're struggling with. So if you didn't do well on the science section, you can walk in and just do that 35-minute science section and then call it a day. Again, this is not in effect right now, but if it does come into effect or you hear talk about it, this is simply to give you the extra information. So when you hear about it, it's not shocking to you. It doesn't throw you off or anything like that. So there's no action you have to take. This is simply for your knowledge. Now, with that said, so we're going to ignore the ACT part because of the section retesting and supers, but there are too many numbers to deal with. So we're going to talk about this bottom one. Now, this is in reference to something called super scoring. You will hear that term. You will hear it over and over and over. So it's important to understand what it means. Now, for the SAT, let's say this student took the SAT 3 times. Well, and these were the scores for every single time. Well, if a university says that it's super scores, what it does is it takes the highest of your reading, which happens to be from exam 3, and the highest of your math, which happens to be from exam 2, and then combines them for the score to be used for admission. So notice that's always going to be higher than any individual score. That's important. Then ACT, so what used to happen, and this was a huge advantage for the SAT, because most universities will superscore SATs, but they wouldn't do it for ACT. So that's part of why ACT is trying that section, or is thinking of trying that section retesting thing and everything, because they're trying to level up and say, we also want to be considered for superscore. And now what happens is normally it's the university that does the super scoring. So you just have to send in the report. So in this case, I would only have to send in score number 2 and score number 3 because score number 1 has no relevant value that I need to submit. So I would only send in these 2 scores. And the university would then automatically super score. ACT is now saying, you know what, we will send the super score. So whereas here the university will send it, here the company itself is saying, you know what, we'll super score, because it was losing the battle with SAT in terms of popularity because of that super scoring feature. Obviously, right? You want, as a student, as a parent, you want the one that's going to make you look good or that's going to play in your favor in some way, shape, or form. And that used to be the SAT. So ACT is trying that. All right, then reporting scores. So now before we get into this, any questions so far? Okay. All right, then we have score choice versus score history. Oh wait, we do have a question. So ACT, so the question is that, is the ACT doing that? So I believe that doing that would be the super scoring. Yes. So while the other changes are not in effect, so these 2 changes are not in effect, if you, however, if we look at just the September and October, because those are full-length exams that students have taken, then yes, the ACT is doing that starting this year, where they'll take the 22 from here, and then they'll take the 21 from here, and the 23 here, and the 20 here, and then give you a super score that's going to be submitted to the universities. So yeah, the ACT is doing that starting this year. It's just not doing the other stuff. And again, if you guys have any questions, just keep them coming. Otherwise, I will keep going, but we are actually moving a lot faster than I expected, which is kind of nice too. Okay, so now we've all heard about this shift to test optional. So before we even get into that, since we were just talking about scoring, this is a better transition, which is score choice versus score history. There are some universities that will simply, will say, you know what, send us the scores that you want us to see. So in this case, you could have taken the test 10 times, right? Again, not recommended at all. Don't do that to yourself. But you could, just for the example, you could have taken the test 10 times and you would only need to submit the ones that you want super scored. So in our previous example, again, the student has taken the test 3 times. University that claims to be score choice will never see the first numbers, right? They will only see the 2 that you sent. So same idea for if you've taken the test 10 times, university would never know because you're only sending the 2 reports that you'd want seen. Score history, on the other hand, which is more common for the competitive universities, well, they want to see everything. So now if you've taken the test 3 times or 10 times, they want the whole report, even if they super score. Okay, this is how nitpicky they're getting about your scores, even if they super score. And a lot of these top universities, Harvard, Princeton, Yale, they do super score. But some of them, like Cornell, will still want to see your score history. Okay, so again, that's just something to keep in mind. And sometimes they don't even post this on their website, so you can always contact. And when I say you, I mean the teenager. No parents, please parents do not reach out to the university. Let your teenager handle it. If parents reach out, it actually sets a negative impression on the university simply because teenagers are almost adults and therefore they should be able to, ask something like this on their own. So just as a heads up, if you want the clarification, and if it's not on their website, you can always just email. Okay, so score reporting. Now, for all the seniors who might be on the call, or even for the parents of juniors, because this is money related. So first of all, there's no such thing as I accidentally sent my score somewhere. Why? Because at the end of the day, College Board and ACT are businesses, and therefore they're going to charge. So a score submission is $12 for every university report, ACT $13. Now, on average, students apply anywhere from 8 to 12 universities. So to split the difference, we're going to say 10. Well, that would roughly end up costing $120 just on sending score reports. This would end up costing $130 just to send score reports if that were the case. So to now mitigate that a little bit, what the college application started doing is they'll ask you your scores, and they'll, even for super scoring information, they'll say, oh, when did you take your highest reading? When did you take your highest math? What was your score? And so on. And what universities have said is, we will accept that. That is called self-reported scores. Universities have said, we will accept self-reported scores, which means that whatever number you give us in your application, we're going to trust you. We're going to trust you. But when we accept you, we would then like the official report. So that will cut down your cost, because even if 50% of the universities on your list are accepting self-reported scores, now you're paying $60 as opposed to $120, right? So it's important to, again, know which ones are self-reported universities and which ones require the official report. Okay, so now that we've covered sort of the score report sending, we've heard some of these terms before. So just want to clarify. Test-blind universities are ones that will not accept any SAT or ACT scores, no matter how much you try and shove them in their faces. So an example of this, they're not going to look at your self-reported scores. They're not going to look at, even if you try and send an official report, you can't, because when you send the official report for a College Board or an ACT, you have to go on their websites, you have to go into your account, and then you have to hit send scores and search the name of the university. For a test-blind university, the name of the university will just not pop up. So you just can't send the report. And there are popular universities. I forget if it's George Washington or Georgetown. One of them is a test-blind university. So there are some really great universities that are simply saying, you know what, we really don't want to deal with the BS that an SAT or ACT is. Because like I said, the maneuvering into the 50% range and all of that, it's just, they're like, we don't want to deal with that BS. We would rather look at the students' performance in terms of consistency, so in terms of their grades, GPAs, extracurricular activities, to interviews, even to determine who they are as individuals, instead of just looking at these extra numbers from a 3-hour exam, right? So then we have test flexible universities. This is like NYU. NYU says that you can submit an SAT, ACT scores. Cool, we will accept it. However, should you instead decide to send us 3 AP exam scores or 3 SAT subject test scores, or if your high school has the International Baccalaureate program, which Barlow does not. Our closest ones are in Greenwich to the south and New Haven to the north. So Barlow does not have the program, but like those are scores that we will accept instead of SAT scores. So they offer you basically flexibility in what you want them to look at. And finally, and the most common one that we've heard, particularly because of COVID, is test optional, which basically states, you don't have to send your scores in, but you could. Now, here's the thing about that. A lot of universities, even if they say it's test optional, they do still tend to prefer numbers, because when the national rankings come out, those the US national rankings and all of the other ones, they're based on the numbers of the incoming freshman class. So the average GPA, the average SAT or ACT scores, that kind of, there are multiple factors, but like these are factors in those rankings. So as such, if your numbers make the university look good, then that's what they're going to want. So that is something to basically have in mind. So test flexible, test optional, that kind of thing. Okay, and then before we get to the FAQs, there are a couple of things I want to show you. And for this, I'm going to stop share and just share my desktop instead, of how to find the information that's relevant to you and basically what to look for. So number one, when we are thinking of, let's do desktop. Okay, so I'm going to pull up incognito, and hopefully that means that when I hit a search, you should see, or I should see exactly what you would see. So now, when it, like I said with the SAT, I said that, oh, you don't have to get a perfect score. You should basically look at what the university wants you to know or wants you to get. So in that case, if you're trying to figure out, oh, what is the average range for this university? Naviance will tell you. A lot of blog posts and everything will tell you. I generally tend to prefer stats that come from the universities themselves. Why? Because every university has to submit basically one report, right? They only have to do the one report for their particular university. However, the blog posts have to keep track of roughly the 4,000 universities in the country. So sometimes they get outdated. They're just a little bit off. Now, in order to figure out what the average SAT ranges or ACT ranges, or GPA, you basically type in the name of the university. And I usually do NYU, and then you type in admission stats or admission statistics, whatever you want willing to type up. You notice the EDU site is where I'm going to be going. I'm not looking at the blog post because again, blogs are great for information. They can be helpful, but when it comes to data, they might not be current because there are just so many universities to keep track of. So with that said, EDU, NYU facts. And you could do this for any university, American University, Boston, every single university, there's basic reports that they have to make public. That's their diversity info, that's their academic profile, a little bit of it, some level of financial aid stuff. NYU is just much more developed, so they have more on their website than some of the universities do. Now notice they tell us what their preferred range is, right? So roughly between a 1350 and 1530. Obviously, they're not going to say no if you were higher than a 1530. But that's roughly the SAT range. And they even gave us specifics by section. Then for the ACT, it's between a 31 and 35. So, and because of COVID and because of test optional, remember that only students who actually look good are going to submit their scores. So now these numbers have also gotten a little inflated. They're higher than they used to be before COVID. Average GPA range for unweighted, so that's the 1 out of 4.0, roughly that. Right? So for every university, there's going to be some level of that information available. It is important that when you are conducting your search or when you have some idea of what universities you want to look at or consider, you look up their SAT or ACT range, because this will tell you when you can stop testing. So if a student now made it into, let's say, got a 1400, okay, done. You're in the range that you need to be in. You don't have to get to a 1500. So stop testing and focus on your schoolwork, focus on your extracurricular activities, because that's all still going to happen. And you have to keep up with all of your GPA and everything while you're still test prepping. So you need to know when your cutoff is. That's what I'm trying to say, is you need to know when is it a good time to stop testing for you, right? And like I said, some universities, it's at 1200. Some universities, it's just the 1050, you tested one time and you're done. So that's why it's important to know where the university you want to go to lands. That's one thing. Then as an SAT prep resource. So actually, let's go back to the PowerPoint for a sec. So jumping to just a couple of FAQs, upcoming test dates. Now, I left the October one in there, even though the registration's gone, because the late registration is still open. So if you, I don't recommend anyone actually register, but I just wanted to have that available just in case. And then of course we have all of these other dates available. Now, one of the slides that we have is going to be a timeline, and I'll show you how and what your testing process and your school year should look like. But the dates are available. Again, this PDF is there. This PowerPoint will be sent to you in PDF form, so you're going to have them with you. Oh, whoops, put that in the wrong spot. Okay. Yeah. So a couple of questions that I tend to get. How many times is it a good time to take the test? 3 is just a good cutoff number. Because what happens is students burn out. It's not even just about testing itself and prep, it's burnout. Remember, you're managing your school workload on top, and particularly with Barlow, this is the first year students can take APs. So quite a few students try and take at least one AP. Some of them do that trifecta of like AP Psych with AP Bio with AP Lang. That used to be a popular trio. So you have a lot of schoolwork and everything to keep up with. 3 is just good. It's good. Even if you have to send your whole score history, no university is going to blink at you if they ask you for your entire score history and you send in 3 reports. No one's going to be like, oh shoot, they tested so many times. It's the average. Then after that, how much does it cost? So really, so it's about $52 for the SAT, $55 for the ACT without the essay. Right now, the SAT essay is not offered. And we no longer have this option available. So really, those are the costs. And then what does it mean to cancel a score or be absent? Really, so first of all, universities will never find out if you just were a no-show for a test or if you canceled a test. You can cancel a test 3 to 4 or up until the Thursday after you've taken that test. So test will always be on Saturdays. You can basically cancel it up until that Thursday. So I usually just say Wednesday, just to be on the safe side. And what that means is you won't know your score, but if you just felt really crappy, or not even really crappy, really, I say save this option for like a medical emergency or something if you really want to. But again, with score choice, with just picking the scores you get to send, this option doesn't really get used. But I have had clients who've just like gone and canceled scores because they just didn't feel right about the number. But bottom line, Canceling a score just means that the test company will basically take your exam and toss it in the trash. So there's no record whatsoever from being passed on to the university. Now, when is a good time to start testing? Ideally, beginning of junior year or after completing Algebra 2. There are some students who finish Algebra 2 at the end of sophomore year, but that's now, basically. For all juniors, now is a good time to start test prepping, whether you're going to do it on your own or however. So in this case, I would say no. Don't just do it just to see how you do. Okay, so, all right, then we have, and just to make sure I acknowledge it, I do see the question in the chat and I'm just going to address it at the end of this slide. How long are scores valid? 5 years. So I've had students who want to take gap years. I also, in one of these presentations, I've had students who, or I guess, attendees who've wanted to like go into the military and, you know, do 4 years of service and then go to college afterwards. Great. In that case, take your SATs in senior year because they're valid for 5 years. Technically, and if you ever see the term, they're always valid because they're, and this does come up because according to SAT and ACT, the scores are always valid. However, the 5 years is coming from universities. Universities want to see within 5 year range. So just to make sure I clarified on that. Subject tests right now, so that's important. Subject tests are not offered right now. So, and this happened just most recently. That's one of the most recent changes. The SAT stopped offering subject tests and he stopped offering the essay because of COVID. So we are not going to worry about that right now. All right, so ideally you want to get all your testing out of the way by the end of junior year. Now, to give you an idea, a timeline. And this slide, if you come to the college application timeline session next month, it's going to come up again. But just to give you an idea what this looks like. So this is junior year, right? And last summer, ideally, so summer is really the ideal time to start prepping because that is about as available and free as you're going to be. So now if you, for this, and this again is for all current sophomores who are on the call, or I guess freshmen, although it's a little early for you, but for all current sophomores who are on the call, at the end, the summer between 10th and 11th grade is when you want to start prepping because you have nothing as time consuming as school plus sports and everything that you have right now going on then. So if at that point we need you to improve by 300 points and that's going to take a lot of work, well, now you have time to put in that level of effort. That's not always possible during the school year, which is why when you start prep over the school year, it tends to get a little prolonged because sometimes students come back without homework. Sometimes students have to cancel. So it's just, or sometimes students do the homework, but they just either haven't used the strategy or were just so exhausted that they did it for the sake of doing it, but they didn't do it with their full best effort, right? So that kind of comes into play. Even then, your next opportunities to take and again, I'm only going to refer to the SAT simply to keep it clean, but remember the ACT information is also available right here. I'm just referring to the SAT to keep it clean. So you have a lot of opportunities in your first semester junior year to test. Now, to the current sophomores on the call or the parents of the sophomores, ideally, I would have you test in August as your first time. Then we could figure out your October and then between November and December. But notice before your midterms come up in January, you're done testing. It's done. It's completely out of your entire plate of stuff you have to get done. So that was the fastest and like ideal way of doing this. And I've had some students go through that. And right now I have students, who are registered who have registered for October and will be for November, December. So it is, again, that's best practice. Because then what happens second semester? So we have January, and that's, again, we have a break then, particularly with MLK weekend, there's a break. We have February break, which for Barlow tends to be an extended weekend. Then we have spring break. Those are all popular times when families go to visit colleges, and college tours, all of that, whether that's traveling, driving, whatever it might be. So what tends to happen is if you're test prepping, that breaks up your pattern, right? It breaks up your flow. And then the March exam. So this is important. All students in public schools in the state of Connecticut, all juniors in public schools in the state of Connecticut get a free SAT in March. So there is a national SAT, which is what I'm referring to on this particular calendar. However, Barlow and Richfield and Wilton and every other public school in Connecticut is going to have an SAT on a normal school day. Usually it's on a Wednesday. And you don't have to register for it. You don't have to pay for it. You just walk in like you would on a normal school day. And that basically, and it's still a real test. However, that's too far into the school year, because now look at what happens in May. The SAT is the first Saturday of May. AP tests are the first 2 weeks of May. So you're going to spend more time prepping for your AP test in April going into May than you are going to be prepping for your SAT, right? Then after that, your finals come up. And at that point, again, you're going to spend time prepping for your finals, and teachers are closing out the grading period. So that means you're going to have more assignments, more tests, more quizzes, whatever it is it takes to round it off. So again, are you going to have legitimate time to prep? And I say that because this is usually when I tend to lose students who just have so much going on there. They just constantly have to cancel. And when you constantly cancel, you also lose the momentum of prep. So that is something to factor in. And I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm not saying that at all. In fact, the fact that you guys are all here means that you can start prep, you can, and I'm not, again, you can start prep, even if if it's on your own tutor class, whatever it might be, and just knock out a few takes and retakes, and then have March be one of your middle or your last retake, right? But it shouldn't be your first. That's what I'm saying. All right, yeah, and then second semester, and we covered this, attend class, talk to students, view of college tours, and so on. But that's kind of where that stands. Now, senior year, so we don't have as many seniors, so I'm not going to dive into this in this time, because we are going to talk about it in the timeline session, and it's just going to be overwhelming right now. But bottom line, what you need to know, all current juniors, this summer, you're not just sitting around. Yes, you can have a legit summer and a social life and everything, but you can also start your writing process, your college, all the essay writing that you have to do. If you get it done in the school year, you're just going to have less stress when you have to go back to school, because now you have to, because remember, you still have to keep up your grades and do the tests, projects, quizzes, everything, homeworks, and you're doing your extracurricular activities. So you don't want to be writing as many essays, or you don't want to worry about your test prep and everything going into senior year. You want that done, and you want to worry about your essays over the summer. And then if you take care of your writing over the summer, this is going to be such a breeze. This will be like the easiest thing you do, because then if you decide last minute that you want to add a university to your college list and they have an extra writing piece, well, at that point, you have time to do the extra writing piece. You don't just have to BS it because you have so many other writing stuff to do, right? So that's just one of the major points there. Let's see. Okay, so with all of that said, it is important that we note that your test is the most flexible part of your application. And what do I mean by that? Well, just jumping back to here, this took 3 years to make, 3 to 3.5 years. This took 3 to 3.5 years to make. This is miscellaneous. This took 3 hours. So you're comparing a 3-hour exam to 3 years of work, right? So this one, even if you do poorly the one time, you prep for it and you can significantly change your score in just a couple months. So this is the most flexible part of your entire testing process. Okay, so now I want to cover one of the questions that we have. Before I dive into the next steps that we have, I want to cover the question that we have in the chat, which is, do you know which Connecticut public schools are homeschool friendly for test taking purposes, or is it true that Connecticut all public schools they're permitted to take? So as far as I know, if you just go to the nearest public school, they can and talk to the guidance counselor at the nearest public school, they should be able to accommodate all homeschooling students. So it's not just, there's not specific universities or high schools rather, for all schools should be, all public schools, not private, all Connecticut public schools should be friendly towards the homeschool students. So, but you have to, but there is paperwork involved because they just have to order a test for you. That's really all it is. It's the school has to order a test for you. Also, and that's actually, so I say that, and just a clarification on that homeschool question. So that homeschooling thing only applies to the March exam. So that in-school exam I just talked to everyone about, the one that the public school students can take, that free SAT, talking to the guidance counselor is for that March exam. Every other exam that's up to you to register. Like for everyone, there's no consistency at that point. It's pretty much whoever wants to register can register. You have different test sites. You might be at your own high school, or you might have to go, 20 minutes away or half an hour away, depending on who's actually hosting that particular time, that particular exam. So only for the March exam is the homeschool part actually relevant. Other than that, everyone is sort of each family for itself type thing in terms of your planning process. So if for SAT, you register on collegeboard.org. For ACT, you do at act.org, and you just pick the date you want to actually take the test. You do your payments, put in all your information, put in a photo ID, and pick your test location. So what test site do you want? And they'll ask you to put in your zip code, so that way you can see what test sites are available. There's like Weston High School, Barlow, Wilton, Richfield, but they're not always offering it. So they're not always hosting. Like let's say, and I'm making this up, I don't know if Barlow is hosting the October test, but if let's say Barlow is hosting, then chances are Weston is not hosting, because it's close enough that all the Weston students can just come to Barlow and register for that test site, right? So that's just a clarification that homeschooling students, yes, you do need to reach out to the public school counselor, the guidance counselors at the public school for the March in school, the free exam. That's it. All of the other ones, that's an independent process by family. Any other questions before I dive into the what to do next? Okay. All right, what's next? So I forgot to delete that. There's no 15 days of videos at the moment. I had that going last year, and that was an accident. But college resources, right? Now, College Board and Khan Academy partnered, I believe 2 years ago or 3 years ago, to provide free SAT prep to all students, regardless of background, ethnicity, everything. And there was, again, an attempt to basically equalize everything. So now if you go to Khan Academy and SAT prep, right now, every student on this call knows what Khan Academy is. So this is not a shock. It's not a surprise, anything like that. I'm simply pulling it up more so the parents are also familiar, so they can hold their teenagers accountable. But if you like, the Khan Academy has a free SAT prep. And now a couple of downsides of this, or not a couple, just majorly the one, which is that, or two, but one is that it covers content, pure content, and it shows you how to do the SAT problems as you would do them in math class. It does not show you strategies. It does not show you shortcuts on how to cut time and the easier way of doing this problem. Because remember, these tests are multiple choice. So really no one cares how you did your work. We just care that you got the right answer. And the prep will show you how to do it the mathematical way, the correct mathematical way, which could end up taking a while. So that's the one downside. And then another one is just it's self-paced and you're on your own. So there's no accountability. So some students tend to start and then they just never finish. I have known siblings of students, older siblings of students who've like gotten into the 1450 range. So done really well on this just by doing the Khan Academy prep consistently. They created a schedule and everything, right? So that's important to know. In addition to Khan Academy, so that's the free resource for prep. What College Board did, and this is one of the reasons why I tend to prefer the SAT versus the ACT, just from a tutor perspective, is that there are 10 free SATs available online. So all I did was Google SAT test 1, and I can do that for test 2, test 3, test 4, etc. And I have a full test here, and I'll click on it in just a sec, but I also have the scoring system and explanations for, this is answers with explanations. That's what that is. Scoring has a one-page answer key and then scoring. Now, with this, I have a full SAT. So I have the reading section, everything. It's a complete SAT. And we have 10 of those available on PDF form online from College Board. So the test maker is giving us all of this. Now, all of the local test prep companies, Bridgewater, C2 Education, Summit, all of them, they tend to print these out and they use these. So some do have their own material, like the larger companies do have their own material, like the Princeton Review and the Kaplan's, but they also use these as well. So you'll get 2 books. One will be the College Board book, which has these exams, and one will be their own book. So pretty much everyone uses these exams because they're free, available online. ACT, on the other hand, does not really give much out, which is a little bit frustrating in terms of if I need you to improve on a math section and we need to have you do them over and over, we're going to run out of content. Like, just ask questions really quickly. So that's something to know. Now, with that said, we do have a question in the chat, and it's actually very relevant, and I'm glad you asked because I forgot to mention the PSAT completely. So the question is, so both good questions on PSAT. Let me actually pull up the timeline slide, because so the question is, could you briefly touch on how the PSAT is different from the SAT, and in conjunction, how is the PSAT different from the PSAT and SQT? So here's what happens. First, what is the PSAT? Let's start from that. PSAT is just a practice SAT. I've run into parents who've said, oh, we interviewed, when they were interviewing and looking for tutors, they said, but so-and-so tutor from such and such company actually said we should actually pay to prep for the PSAT. Why? Now, don't do that unless, so here are a couple of exceptions. Unless you have a summer program that you're trying to apply to, and that summer program is asking you for a PSAT score, right? Now, the only other, that's the main one. And then the other one, which happened to be an exception during COVID, although we have sorted that out, so it shouldn't be relevant anymore. But that's if you're trying to be recruited as an athlete. And in the beginning of COVID, we had just a lot of test cancellations, right? So at that point, some of the universities were like, okay, cool, well, send us your, and since the shutdowns for us happened in March 2020, universities would say, okay, cool, but you took your PSAT, the junior year PSAT in October, so like send us those scores, right? So, but that, like I said, that was like a COVID exception. But for the most part, if there's no program that you have in mind that you want to apply to for the summer or wherever, then don't pay to get prep for the PSAT with that. So that's just the bottom rule. Now, to expand a little bit more about PSAT, you will have PSATs, and again, it varies by school, varies by county, not varies by county because Connecticut is actually fairly uniform, but across the country, it actually varies by county and everything as well. But what happens is some universities, some high schools offer PSATs in 9th grade and in 10th grade and in junior year. Some only do junior year. So bottom line is 9th and 10th grade PSATs are just practice. They actually are not anything. They're not anything. They're not completely like the SAT in that the math section only covers what the majority of those 9th graders would have learned in the country. So if majority of the 9th graders in the United States have not covered Algebra 2, then the PSAT is not going to, for the 9th graders, will not include Algebra 2. And then same idea goes for 10th grade. So bottom line is 9th and 10th grade PSATs don't include all the math that will be on the actual SAT. Now, junior year is called the PSAT/NMSQT, which basically means NMSQT stands for National Merit Scholarship Qualifying Test. It does not guarantee that you will get the scholarship. It simply means that you qualify if you have a nearly perfect score. It's still, now this PSAT is going to be much more similar to the actual SAT in that the content is the same. However, the number of questions and the timing is different. So that's it. It's basically a little bit shorter than the actual SAT would be. That's the only difference at that point. Now, if you've already started your SAT prep over the summer, because remember between 10th and 11th grade, if you already started your SAT prep, then this is just PSAT in October is just another way to practice, right? So notice it wasn't this intimidating thing. You already have the strategies down at this point because you've been prepping for the real test. So this is just an additional practice, really. With the National Merit Scholarship, so you are competing against the 50,000 juniors in the country at any given point in time. It's not, so it's actually highly competitive. And because it's highly competitive, I usually tell students that, yes, try your best, because again, you might have been prepping over the summer. Maybe you haven't been, but don't spend money prepping for the PSAT because you're competing against 50,000 people. Instead, if you are looking for scholarships, go to scholarships.com, go to College Board Scholarship Search, and there are a couple others. Go to those, because then they won't have 50,000 people applying at the same time. They might have 5,000, they might have 7,000 or 10,000. Not insignificant, but still definitely not 50,000, right? So in that, if you're, again, this is more like, yes, you should practice. If you're doing this on your own on Khan Academy, you can by all means practice for the PSAT. But if you're trying to figure out if you should pay for a tutor and all of that, then for the PSAT, it's not worth it. For the SAT, then that's worth it because that's the real test in the first place. So I hope that, and one last thing about PSAT, generally it's in October and your scores don't come out until mid-December. So roughly around the December 12th, December 15, that kind of time frame. I hope that helps. Do we have any other questions or clarifications or anything? Okay. Let me just, so one thing now, because earlier I said, should you take the test just to see how you do? And I said, no. Well, then what are you supposed to do instead? Well, I showed you the example from College Board's website with the 10 free SAT exams. But if you go to test prep companies, one of their marketing strategies, like Bridgewater Prep, Princeton Review, Summit, they all use, Bridgewater and Summit definitely use those College Board exams that I just showed you. They print them out for the SAT, and that's basically what you're going to be doing. So what they tend to do as a marketing strategy is they'll have you come in, register, come in, and just take a free exam just to see how you do. And then they'll give you a score report and tell you about their services and everything. So at that point, that's a good idea to do something like that, right? Okay, and then all right, so that's one thing. And then I just to note, I do see the next the homeschooling question in the chat. I'm just gonna go through a couple of these points and then we'll circle back to it. Next, create a list of 5 to 10 potential universities. And when I say potential, it doesn't have to be your final list. Just, we want to know what the highest score you need to get is. Like I showed you for the NYU admissions, right? If NYU is the dream school, or it's the hardest of your list, okay, great. What's the SAT score we now need to prep you for? What's the ACT score we now need to prep you for? Pick one. And oh, so going back to this, when I said prep companies, you can take a free SAT, take a free ACT. Now that you all have an idea of what a good score is for both exams, study for the one that you do better on. Don't try and do both exams because the strategies are different in some ways. Because remember, one's a time crunch exam and one is a more time-based exam. I mean, no one's going to be sitting around for 10 minutes on the SAT, but it's a little more time flexible. So don't try and prep for both exams. Pick one exam to then dive into, because every university that accepts one exam accepts the other one. There is no, we only want the SAT or we only want the ACT. There's no such thing. So create a list of about 5 to 10 potential with basically figure out what your hardest university to get into is on your list. And that's the one that you want to get your SAT score or ACT score range into. Determine what your target score is and at least allow for like 3 to 5 months of prep. And I say 5 months only because school is running and you're not as consistent in the homework or you're not as consistent in the meeting. So really just varies, but at least 3 months of prep. And that doesn't matter if you are doing it alone or online course or with a tutor, but it is important to figure out realistically what your study habits are, because I have had clients who've signed up their teenagers for like an online course with the Princeton Review or something. And the teenager like opened it 1 time or 2 times and then never went back to that again. Right? And because there's no accountability. So is accountability important? Is it not important in that the teenager can take care of it and so on? So lots of factors to consider, but that comes into play. So now the question that we had in the chat about homeschooling, is that for homeschoolers, does the same process for registration apply for the PSAT? So in this case, it's actually important for you to contact, you don't generally register for the PSAT through College Board. This is done through your school. So at that point, I would actually recommend contacting the guidance counselor of your local public school and of your local public high school rather, to see if they can just order one more exam for the homeschooler. So actually starting junior year, it's actually a little more important to be in touch with the guidance office of your local high school for all for homeschoolers and actually for non-homeschoolers. So now with that said, a couple things. This is my contact information, particularly my email address. If you are interested in receiving and I'll show you what that newsletter looks like. So the newsletter, again, we're gonna X out of this. I'm still sharing my desktop, I believe. Yeah, I think so. Okay, so then just to show you what the newsletter looks like, it's simply a basic email with a list. So let's just make sure I'm sharing the right thing. It's just a list of what are your priorities for this month? And then I highlight the ones that are important. So what should you focus on? Well, everyone finds out that August 1st is when applications open. Here are the priorities for juniors and seniors. I have resources. So these are all links to the stuff that you need. Sample, this is the prompts, essays, and so forth. Because back then that was the priority for all seniors. And juniors get the same one, but right then their priorities for juniors had been test prep. So then I offer tips on how to navigate some parts and then tools. So we have the timeline, we have a college list of just something you can, how to organize it, and then just contact info for me if you're interested in knowing more or having help with any one of these process. So if you are interested, you can sign up through, again, the link. We're going to email that out. But basically what's going to happen is it's just a sign up page of receiving free information every month. Again, no pressure on any of this. It's simply to help you stay organized. And that way you have the link sent to your inbox every month. So you don't have to stress about keeping track of all this information. But yeah, so if you are interested, please let me know. And again, my email address is on file. If you have any questions, now is a great time to open it up. So do we have anything? So no questions? Either everyone just fell asleep because this was a lot of information. Or I guess we covered everything. And again, if you do find you have questions along the way, just feel free to email.
And I also want to say thank you to Priyanka for the presentation, and thanks to everyone for attending. I will be emailing you all Priyanka's slides. We also did record the program, which we will put on the library's YouTube channel. That should be on the YouTube channel within the week. So if you missed any of the details, you can go back to the YouTube channel and check out the video. I'll include Priyanka's contact information again. And also we do have a lot of programs coming up. So the next one will be on Monday, and that's more for seniors though, right, Priyanka?
Yes, yeah. So we're actually going into the college application and I'm showing you, okay, well, here's what you put for this section. This is the most common mistake students make and so on. But that is for current seniors. It's not for juniors. I mean, you could come if you'd like, but it's really relevant to seniors who are filling out their applications right now.
Great. So we do have a program next on the 23rd, which is going to be all about writing the common application essay. That will be a great one. Every month, Priyanka does a Q&A session, which is very informal. So you can just bring any questions you have. It's usually pretty small, and Priyanka can give a lot of one-on-one attention in that. So just check out our website. We have all of the programs there. And I just wanted to say in closing, thank you for spending all this time on a Saturday morning with us. And thanks to Priyanka, and thanks to all of you for coming.
Thank you. And if you have any questions, then feel free to put them in the chat, or again, feel free to email me. And like Sarah said, we do Q&As every month. So really trying to make this process as smooth as possible, because we just don't get enough information from school and everyone else. So yeah.
Any more questions? I guess we're good.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.